I talked about a day for remembering, and this is just what this has been. And Elm Park was a remarkable place. Consider, 2 Englishmen came over to teach in a prep school in Northern Ireland. The war came about 2 years later. They set off, not very far, down the road to Palace Barracks, and they joined the Royal Irish Rifles. And they went after the war, from which, mercifully, they both returned. Willow, rather battered, he should never have been past fit to go to war, but he was back at Rockport by 1916, invalided out. Seth Smith was wounded, won a military cross, and one interesting little point about his career, he was sent on, as far as I remember, it was a grenade course, which was held just outside Dublin at a place prophetically named Elm Park. It's now a golf club. They came back to Rockport at the end of the war. They decided to start a school of their own. They went off, Sir Smith piloting a motorcycle, Willow in the sidecar, and they trawled County Down looking at various properties, but there was always one snag. And eventually they were given an auction notice about a sale in County Armagh, and that sale was at Elm Park. Old Mrs. Blacker Douglas had died in 1919. And, you know, looking at the Blacker Douglas Memorial this morning, the thought occurred to me that if her grandson hadn't been killed with the 1st Battalion of the Irish Guards in the early spring of 1915, that auction mightn't have been necessary, and Elm Park School mightn't have come into the home that it did come into. Curious. And the mention of war makes me realize that Elm Park, although a young school when the Second World War broke out in 1939, they had their casualties too. I've done a very rough run through the lists, and I see the names of Humphrey Thompson, Tony Bullock, Brian Woods, Billy Hurst, and there may be more. And I'll be glad to list we know if there are that they know of. Very shortly after the war, all too shortly after the war, Korea. And there, Jerry Fitzgibbon didn't come back. And of course the story hasn't ended there, because the Troubles took a terrible toll. Sir Norman Strong and Jim, Oliver Heaton, and those violent deaths make me recall that the first owner of Elm Park was one James Maxwell, one of the 3 Maxwell brothers who settled in the area. And James and his wife were murdered in the 1641 rebellion at College Hall. He was James Maxwell of Mullatinny, which was the old name of Elm Park, but he must have been housekeeping for a brother or something, and so the cycle of violence has gone on. Finally, one thing that I loved about Elm Park was the characters there were in the domestic and outside staff. They added an awful lot to the place, you know. Willie Blakely, who was the sort of kingpin of the garden. But he hadn't always been that. He assured me that he had started off as an assistant groom to old Mrs. Blacker Douglas in about 1912, 1914. And gradually he'd worked his way up through the hierarchy of all that, and eventually he got into the garden, and that was a pretty big move. And he ended up as head gardener, and a jolly good head gardener. And you know, when I went there in 1947, there were some delightfully sort of feudal touches that still prevailed, although we were in the middle of the 20th century. And one of them was that Blakely used to appear about 10 o'clock in the kitchen, and if he was lucky, he was given a mug of cha, and he sort of warmed himself against the aga. And then he and the cook would go into a sort of a conference about what vegetables you would like. And you may make the usual cracks that everybody does make about school food, but here were two very solemn professionals discussing, as if it was the Ritz, what was going to be served to the young gentlemen with their lunch. Willie Blakely, and then in the yard, Bruce. Remember Cecil Bruce? And Conley, Alfie Conley. And today a lovely touch. When I was going up the hill to go into the church, a man came up and introduced himself, and he was Jim Conley, whom I remember as about the size of this table. And he held out a finger like that, looked slightly sort of moth-eaten at the ends, and he said, I was saying what a great mechanic his father had been. You see, always repairing broken down mowers and things. And before we got mains electricity, courtesy of the Graham family, he was to mastermind the old generator at the back. And he showed me this figure, yes, he was a very good mechanic. He was fixing a lawnmower one day, and fortunately I put my hand in just to the sort of cutting cylinder, just as he'd got the engine going. And, there was some of that. But he just sort of thought it was all part of the job. Blakely, Connolly, Bruce. I don't remember him. I do remember Barnes and I do remember McElveen. They had ceased to work at Elm Park when they had been sold off. But they lived sort of rent-free in two of the lodges. And they were great people. And they could be replicated, their names, in the domestic staff inside. Peter Atchison remembers a few of them for rude names. But I promised I wouldn't talk for long. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout. Thank you all for turning up, and those, especially those people that come vast distances, looking at Franklin Cardy. And it's good to see Gordon Hillis again, and Owen French. Good. I was able to give Owen good news about his brother's jackdaw that bolted from Killilea Station at the end of one term. It took exception to the train coming in from Monaghan and took off in the direction of its home, Elm Park. And the next day, the French boys came out from Armagh here. Their father was commanding the TA battalion. And they came out on their bikes, and we trawled the whole place looking for the missing jackdaw. Never thought, and eventually Dominic French wrote it off. But about 4 years later, I was standing talking to Mr. McMullen, the farmer, who lived just outside McElveen's lodge, and a jackdaw came and lit on his shoulder. And I said, "Oh, where did you get that jackdaw?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "It flew in from the station direction about 4 years ago, and it's been with me ever since." Yeah, it's a happy ending. I pass it on. And thank you for being very patient.